Welcome to Garden DC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. This episode, we're joined by Jenny Rose Carey. She's a renowned educator, historian, and author, and also a senior fellow horticulture at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society in Philadelphia.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Kathy.
I've been wanting to have you on since I started this podcast way back in March.
Oh,
And one of our first podcast subjects was the Philadelphia Flower Show. And I don't know if you got a chance to listen to it yet, but Marianne Wilburn and I, another garden communicator, and I talked about what we loved that year and past Philadelphia Flower Show experiences as well.
I'll make sure I listen to it after this.
Yeah, so yeah, I almost feel like we've come kind of full circle since then. So, but a lot has changed since that week of the flower show.
Exactly. Yes, we were very lucky. We managed to get the flower show in, and everyone could see the exhibits and learn some things. And we didn't know what was coming at the time, did we?
I think we had like a little clue
An
that the world was about to
inkling.
shut down, but that first week of March was definitely different. And then we thought, okay, in 2 weeks we'll be back together. Oh no.
I know. We didn't really understand, I don't think. Yeah.
No, that is for sure. But it's kind of good. We were on a little bit of a break. We got a little more time in our own gardens. So I did want to talk to you today about your home garden, Northview, which is outside of Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's about 17 miles north of Center City, and it's about 4.5 acres. And as you said, I've actually done more weeding this year than ever. I'm normally on the road doing lectures. I would have been up in Long Island and down, who knows where. But it's that's the silver lining to this is those of us who are lucky enough to have a garden, even if it's an indoor garden, have really just benefited from our interactions with green and living things. Yeah.
So from your accent, we know that's not a Pennsylvania or Philadelphia accent.
Really, Kathy? No.
So I was going to say, let's
Yeah.
start at the beginning. So what brought you to horticulture? What brought you to Pennsylvania?
Okay. So I was born in London, in Islington, and grew up in a little village called East Malling in Kent. So that's southeast of London. And my dad's family had been there since the 1600s. So was in the next village over to my grandparents. One grandfather was a farmer. All of my family gardened, and my dad is a botanist. So I really, we had gardens all the time growing up. And of course, I was the oldest of 4 girls, so I had to be, helper gardener, weeder, digger, planter. So I didn't know any different really. And it is a bit of a cliche to say that a lot of Brits are gardeners, but it's pretty true even today, I think. But back then, pretty much everyone had a vegetable patch. We had, the equivalent of a community garden called an allotment, which we wheeled our wheelbarrow down the village street and took the tools and did the weeding and wheeled. It always seemed to be uphill both ways when you're a kid, but so our little cottage garden wasn't big enough to grow food really, and but we had plenty of flowers and one little silver birch tree, but we played outside all the time. There wasn't room inside to play, so my mum would tip us all out. So it was a nice childhood. I really hope that more kids get outside and have been outside, because they're saying it's much safer to be outside than inside. So I hope it helps encourage parents and grandparents to take them out and about.
I think so. I'm seeing more and more of my neighbors' children who I didn't even know existed
Oh,
in the past few months coming by. And I even had a little 18-month-old toddler visit the other day, and her father had let me know over the garden fence that this was their daily walk, that she always
Oh,
liked to come and stop there, and she was inspecting all the daylilies along my border. So
oh,
that was
that's so
fun to learn.
sweet. Oh, that is nice. No, I really, those of us in the industry keep saying, get your kids outside, do some gardening, grow some food, plant some seeds with them, or whatever you can do. But I think everything is pointing to how it helps mental health, how it helps, it's exercise, it's fresh air, it's all the things that we've known for generations, and I hope that message is getting through to people that haven't tried gardening before and that they have a go.
So you grew up with chlorophyll in your veins.
Yes.
And then when you went off to school, were you thinking you would be a professional horticulturist, or were you looking for another pursuit?
No, I didn't really know. My dad, being in botany, by the time I went to university, botany and zoology had sort of merged. So there weren't many places you could study botany. So I studied biology, undergraduate at Southampton. And then I really didn't still know what I wanted to do. And I could have thought about horticulture because the little village that we lived in, East Morling, um, actually had an agricultural and horticultural research station in it. So a lot of my parents' friends were in the business of more like fruit, apples, strawberries, and all my summer jobs have been picking strawberries and those sort of things. But I still wasn't sure, and I ended up training at Oxford University to be a teacher, postgraduate education, and that's where I met my husband, who's from Philadelphia. So that was how I ended up here. We got married after we finished school, and then a few years later, we moved to the Pennsylvania area where his family, actually, a lot of the Carey family is from Baltimore. So it's all this East Coast. So we knew we'd move somewhere, Baltimore or Philadelphia.
Lovely. And so you said you had three younger sisters,
Yes, yep.
and you have three daughters. Is that
Yes.
correct?
And my sisters, between them, have another 7 daughters. So, yes, there's a reason I study women's history and horticulture. You know, so my dad has 4 daughters, 10 granddaughters, and then my middle daughter just had a grandson who's about 11 months old. So that's the first to break the streak for 4 generations, because my mum was one of 2 girls as well. So there's a lot of girls.
Yeah, so a lot of feminine energy, a lot of growing.
Yes, and they do get on very well, which is great. And some of them are growing house plants. The daughter that just had the baby, I think there is something about buying a house and then realizing you've got to take care of, either indoors or outside, whatever. And so she's growing all kinds of vegetables from seed and has house plants and all kinds of things. So I'm very, very pleased.
Nice. And I met your daughter Mead, I think it is, at the
Yes.
at the flower show, and she had entered a competition, correct?
Yes. Oh my goodness. So check out Mead's miniatures on Instagram. She's doing all kinds of miniature things. She's now living in London with her husband, and she's always loved dolls' houses and things. It's funny because she's 6'1", but she's loved the tiny things in life, and so she entered the last 2 years in the miniature settings at the Philadelphia Flower Show, and they're the little garden room type things. So that's what she loves to do.
Those are my favorite part of the flower show, you have to tell her. That
Oh, I
those
will.
miniature gardens, I wait all day till the crowds subside and then run back to that corner so I can like take each of them in and take tons of photos. I'm a big dollhouse and miniature person myself.
Oh, I'll check her out then on Instagram. She's got some stuff up, and I'm sure she'll put more up. She's been making all kinds of things over in London. So,
Yeah, and maybe we'll have to have her on the podcast sometime to talk miniature gardening pointers.
oh yes, yeah, there is a big community. You're right. There's a Janet Calvo who lives over in Seattle, who wrote the little, you know her from GardenCom. I think she's a member, and she wrote the book on miniature gardens. But me got the chance to meet her at the flower show a couple of years ago. She came and spoke, and it's just if you don't have very much space, growing little miniature plants is just a wonderful way to have your own little garden, but on a small scale.
Yeah, and you can make such little vignettes and tell stories with them. So
Yes,
it's a lot of
yeah,
fun.
it is
And
fun.
and so with you and your husband, you settled outside of Philadelphia, and it's your property Northview that you live at now is described as Victorian. Um, so what makes it Victorian?
Just the age of the house. So, not particularly the garden style. That would be more carpet bedding, and I can't do that. It's labor intensive. But so the house is from 1887, and it's a historic house. It was built by Wilma and Anna Atkinson. And Wilma Atkinson was the founding editor of the Farm Journal. And those of you who grew up in farming families might remember the Farm Journal. I've had people all over the country say they looked forward to it arriving, in their mailboxes. I think it's still around, but we had a million circulation at one point, back in 125 years ago or whenever. So it was pretty influential, and he was a fighting Quaker, very, very interesting guy. I mean, we know how much Quakers fought for, abolition, but they were pacifists. But there was this subset of Quakers that really believed so strongly in abolition that they would go and fight for the end of slavery. So, I feel that he was also pro women's rights as well. Back in 1915, he was the head of the Men's League for woman suffrage in Pennsylvania. And
Wow, I never knew there was such a thing.
yeah, so 1915, before women got the vote, obviously that was in 1920, so 100 years ago, across the country, because the people that were voting, men were voting on whether women should have the right to vote. So, but it got turned down in Pennsylvania in 15. But his three daughters, I mean, he had three daughters, he and Anna had three daughters, were they're all very educated. I think they all went on to post degree education, and he was definitely a progressive. He was definitely looking at ways to help people farm more efficiently. He talked about a lot of conservation issues which no one was talking about. Like, he had the Liberty Bell or Liberty Bird Club to help young people learn about birds, because it was a thing to kill birds because they thought they were eating the fruit. So, he was on that end of the conservation. I mean, some of his recipes for trying to get rid of things were, like arsenate of lead and things like that. But I don't think they realized how toxic those sort of things were back then. But it makes interesting reading. There's some online, the Farm Journal, it's called, and also Wilma Atkinson's autobiography is online. So if you look up his name and Northview, it's in the Great American Newspaperman series. So it's very fascinating. I mean, I'm really interested in the Quaker influence on landscape architecture and gardens, because if you look in this Philadelphia area, there's about 35 public gardens that all belong to this America's Garden Capital Group, and many of them have either Quaker foundation exactly or have Quaker influence by board members and other people that helped set it up, because the Quakers loved nature. And, you look at Wick in Germantown, you look at Longwood, you look at, so many of them, there was definitely that influence.
Yeah, a few years ago, the organization that you and I are both members of, Garden Com, the organization for garden communicators, writers, photographers, etc., we did a Quaker tour of the Philadelphia area, hitting some of those Quaker properties. So that was really enlightening to learn a lot of that history. And that was my first time visiting Wick, and that was a highlight for me.
Yes, yeah. They have a podcast. I did one on old roses with them, so check that one out. It's called The Curiosity Cabinet, I think, that one. But
Hmm.
their old roses are world famous. I think it might be the oldest rose garden in America, if I remember rightly. So that's in Germantown. Yeah, there's a lot of history here, and as you know, I really love the women's history up here as well. And many of the early 1900s gardeners were women, because they were really trying to get out of their box of their, house and home, and start making friends and getting out and about and doing a lot of social change, like forming homes for widowed people and orphan girls and prison reform and all those sort of things. And it all ties into gardening in a weird way because a lot of them were fabulous gardeners in their own right. So it's an interesting history.
Yep, and very progressive.
Yes, very progressive. Yeah.
Interesting. So, in your background, you taught at Temple University, correct?
Yep, and at the Barnes as well. The Barnes Foundation has a horticulture program. I taught garden history in that, and then I taught woody plants and what else did I teach? Oh, history of landscape architecture as well, and foundations of horticulture as well.
And a few weeks ago on the podcast, we had another Temple University professor on who's now gone on to write her shrubs and
Oh,
hedges book,
Eva
Eva
Monheim.
Monheim. Yep.
Yes,
So
she's a
she's
friend of mine. Yes, yep.
yes, and small world and close circles of horticulture. And then you went on to be director at the Ambler Arboretum.
Yes,
Can
yeah.
you talk about that arboretum?
So that is the old Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women. So that site that ties back to the women that I study and give lectures on. So that was founded by more Quakers. What a surprise! Primarily Jane Bown Haynes from the Haynes family of Wick. There we go, circles. And she'd gone to see the women's horticulture schools in Europe, and came back and decided that America needed a school of horticulture. There was Lothorpe up in Groton, Massachusetts. I don't know how to pronounce that, but that was design more, and her school was the first horticulture school, and so it was designed to teach young people not only the brain work of how to do horticulture, but the actual physical work. So there's pictures of them in long dresses climbing trees and in the greenhouse with mud on the bottom of their hems and things like that. So it's really amazing. And so that became Temple Ambler, and it became an arboretum. It's really what Stephanie Cohen was the director before me. You might remember her. And she called it a landscape arboretum because there's a series of gardens, and each garden has sort of historical significance and women that were associated with it, mainly like Louise Bush Brown, who many of you might have an old copy of America's Garden book, which still has some good stuff if you ignore the arsenate of lead again. But but most of it's got great design things in it and all kinds of things. So I was there nearly 10 years. Yeah, and it's a great place. I co-wrote a book when it was the 100th anniversary called A Century of Cultivation with Marianne Fry, and we did a lot of gathering of the archives and trying to preserve that history, because women's history often tends to get lost, unfortunately. But so that was good.
That's wonderful. And so with the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society, you were the director of Meadowbrook Farm in Jenkintown.
Yes.
And now you've recently took on a new title.
Yes, I'm now the senior fellow in horticulture. I'm doing. I mean, I've always done a lot of education, as a teacher, but I'm outreach. I'm working with development to try and work on ways that we can bring more money in to fund a lot of our projects through being out in the community, and these days giving webinars, rather than in-person lectures. But when we can go out and about, I'll go back to doing lectures. But anything to get the word out about good quality horticulture, help people learn how to, at this point particularly, grow their own vegetables. We've got a whole Harvest 2020. If you look on our PHS online .org website, we've got you can sign up to be a grower or a sharer or donate to us for all the things that we're trying to help with a lot of food insecurity at the moment. So yes, it's an interesting new job that happened right as lockdown happened. So it might not be quite the same as what we were imagining before, but there we go. These things happen.
Yeah, but certainly good timing with the harvest sharing and ramping up that program.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. People are really putting their backs into it and growing much as much extra, giving it to food banks. Really, planting an extra row. I know we did that with GardenCom, the plant a row for the hungry. Same idea. All of us want to try and help out as much as possible. We have skills, and we might as well use them. And we have soil. We can grow it in pots. We can grow it in raised beds wherever we have a extra little row.
For sure. And it's so easy to donate, and so many places, are so happy to get fresh fruit and vegetables and fresh herbs and even cut flowers. I was surprised to gather a bunch of zinnias from my garden a few years ago and drop them off with the vegetables to a local soup kitchen, and they were far more excited about the zinnias than anything.
Oh, but I mean, flowers make people happy. I mean, we know that. So I really feel like anything we can do to help people, maybe it's give a bunch of flowers to your neighbor or your little girl that's walking down the street when she comes on her walk. I know people. I think gardeners are such generous people. Anyway, that's part of our nature because we're always giving each other, a little packet of seeds or a slip of a plant. We just had a little boy over yesterday. We're all wearing what masks and everything. And my husband Gus dug up a bit of his raspberry cane and gave it to him. And that little boy loved the raspberries, so now he can grow his own raspberries. So that sort of thing. That's what we do naturally. But I think now we need to double our efforts and make sure we're doing it more and helping people. Gus gave him the instructions of how to plant it, how to water it in, give them something to garden with, and then give them some instructions to go with it as well.
hmm Yeah, things that we've been doing out of just our nature for years just need to become more deliberate and planned, probably.
Yes, yeah, I think so. But I think it's good. And food insecurity is such a big issue, and it's not really talked about a lot. And I think also that availability of fresh fruit and vegetables is another whole problem. You might be able to get food, but it might not be of very good quality, or it might not be very nutritious. And if it's grown in the local community in good soil, then the nutrition value is much better as well.
And when you grow it yourself, it just tastes so much better.
Yes, I know. And you realize you're and then you try something else the next time. It's sort of like success is good and then you do something else. So that's good.
So I wanted to bring us to your book that came out a couple years ago called Glorious Shade, which I love the title, by the way.
Oh,
I keep thinking it's just called Shade, and then I pull it out and I'm like, oh no, it's Glorious Shade. It's
well,
not just shade.
I mean, the backstory on that is that, so I was asked by Timber Press to write the book, but so many people, when they talk to me about shade or even some other books, start with, "Oh no, you have shade," and I'm like, go outside today. Where do you want to be? You want to be in the shade. I mean, it's probably 10 degrees cooler under the trees, or in the shade. Where do you want to sit? You want to sit in the shade right now. And the plants, a lot of the plants in, depending where you garden, but a lot of the plants in hot summer climates really appreciate part day shade. And, if you read the English gardening books, a lot of them say full day sun. But where do we need to put them in the mid Atlantic? We need to put them in definitely afternoon shade. So it's sort of like we've sort of, we haven't really talked about that enough because that afternoon sun out there, right now is hot, and those poor plants are wilting in that afternoon sun. So
Yeah, so many of the plant profiles and descriptions I write these days are part sun, part shade, prefers not to be in afternoon sun.
exactly. Exactly. I think people are finally understanding that. But actually, even a few years ago, nobody was saying that. I really feel like it's good. We're getting the picture because, that is really we know from if you went to the swimming pool, I'm not that sure whether you could go or not now, but if you did back in the day, you go in the morning if you don't want it too hot, and by after work, if you're going, oh boy, is it hot over there, unless you've got a nice tree in the way of the sun. But we know it instinctively, but then we put this poor little astilbe in afternoon sun, and we're like, why is it wilting? Oh, let me see. And what you do find is just obviously, if that astilbe is in afternoon sun, it needs double the amount of water in the soil that it would if it was in morning sun. So it's also saving on your water bill, as well. So
And if only we could make our whole gardens, our whole yards be morning sun, afternoon
I
shade.
know that would be good, but not in this book. But I am writing another book. I don't remember if I even told you, but it's going to be more the sun equivalent. And when so this garden, I've been at Northview Garden. I've been here 23 years, and I have all different. I'm lucky enough to have a mixture. I've planted very many trees, but there are so many techniques for helping with that water, stopping water loss. So I'm going to be writing about some of those in the next book.
That will be very helpful because I think one of my personally biggest challenges is dry shade, in particular, in under big old growth oak trees, and a lot of those people who are in inner neighborhoods, old suburbs where you have huge trees, not much understory, and then your ground cover plantings.
Yeah. So I mean the if you whatever dry conditions you have, I mean if it's under trees, your friend is leaf mold, and for so many people, and I'm not passing judgment on it, but if you actually want to have more in the way of moisture in your soil, you have to add tons of compost and leaf mold to that soil. It's unbelievable how much you have to add, but even if you leave the leaves that are there or shred them and put them back, it will make such a huge difference in only a year or two. And when I go to people's properties and look at their soil, most of the time the leaves are blown off in the fall, and then they're taken either to the curb for a lovely township recycling program, which we love. But if every time those leaves drop, they're taken away, that poor garden becomes sort of parched. And I've seen it in my own garden that the more leaves you can add, and it's almost like you can't add too many. Obviously, you don't pile them against the trunk of the tree, but the more you can add, the better your chances of success in a dry shade situation. It's amazing, if you can do that.
Yeah, you're just returning what the tree is naturally shedding back to the soil. And it's amazing, like you say, how quickly application of leaf grow or leaf mulch or whatever
Yeah,
your
whatever you
personal
can
term
get.
for it is just disappears after a month or so.
Yep. And the one thing about ground cover, even the dreaded Pachysandra, which seems to have taken over the whole of the East Coast, I like the native Pachysandra, by the way. It's not as fast growing, but the good thing about any of those ground covers is that the leaves just get trapped in there as they fall, and then they work themselves down to the soil. So, people poo-poo ground covers, but really they're very helpful to return those leaves in there, and people don't notice that they're there, so they don't blow them away. So that's a trick, if you're struggling with it a bit.
Yeah, it does kind of swallow up a lot of those excess leaves.
Yep. Yep. And then just be judicious in your watering. I mean, you do have to sometimes water it under, especially a big old tree that has surface roots. Oaks are actually better than maples, to be honest. Norway maples are almost the worst. And the trick there is, don't beat yourself up if you can't grow anything very close to the trunk. Just pull the whole thing out more to the edge of the canopy, and just really don't worry about having anything much close to the trunk. You don't have to cover every inch of soil with something, and often your ground covery things will either seed themselves in or grow towards the trunk from where you've done the planting, and they grow I've got heucheras growing right against tree trunks that I couldn't planted them there, but they grew from seed. And so they'll put themselves where they by seed or runners where you couldn't possibly plant them. Epimediums, the same. You plant them away from the trunk, and then over time they'll spread themselves, or start with very, very tiny little plants. That's my other trick. The smaller the better, even if it's like, say, I don't know if you know uh, epimedium, which is the bishop's hat, but it's, or fairy wings, some people call it, but that is one of the ones that gets labeled for dry shade. I mean, it does better in, a moderate moist soil, but even a tiny little like shoot off the side of somebody else's is pretty resistant to drought. It might take a year or two to get going, but if you look after it, that will spread into a nice patch. So,
and I highly recommend epimedium for taking over where other ground covers are not so desirable. I actually tested a little patch of epimedium up against English ivy, and it ran over the ivy.
oh well, very good to know. I will, if you don't mind me quoting you on that, I will quote you.
Oh, not at all, and I'll be happy to share photos as well, because I've tried every ground cover available up against the ivy just to see who would duke it out. Liriope, um, the hardy geranium, all of them. Some of them will stand against it, hold their ground, but nobody has actually run over and swallowed it until epimedium.
Okay, good. Everyone take note.
And that one, and you get flowers to boot. So there you
Yes,
go.
and there's all kinds of new ones out there. But the old-fashioned, the toughest ones are the old Roseum and Sulphurium. If you can get those, they are the strongest and most garden-worthy, and very easy to be a pass-along plant from a neighbor. So the yellow one and the pink one, the old-fashioned ones, are the toughest.
Yeah, I would say the sulfurium you can get from almost any plant swap or plant
Yes,
exchange.
yes, go
That
for it.
that
Yes.
one's a good pass along one. So one topic that always goes hand in hand when talking about shade gardening is deer resistance.
Yes. Well, top of the list has to be hellebores. They're Lenten rose, some people call them, especially the ex hybridus, which just means they've all crossed with each other. And there's so many wonderful ones. They're a late winter blooming um, ground cover, really, when it turns out, they spread and they might seed in for you. They will take pretty much any conditions, including pretty dry shade. I have to say, mine are in dry shade. And again, start with small plants. I started with $3 plants that somebody gave me, from that are just absolutely minute, and now they're like bushel basket size. The reason I say small is because there's often small gaps between roots, and you look at your tree trunk, and you look and see where the big roots are coming off the trunk, and then you look at those triangles, and see where you might be able to find a space. But back to deer resistance. Epimedium is deer resistant. Brunnera, the perennial forget-me-not, is completely deer resistant. And how do I know all these plants? Because I turned around the other day, I was out in the garden with my husband, and over his shoulder, he couldn't see, was a buck standing bold as brass in my garden. And then there's a mum with a little fawn. So pretty much anything I grow has to be at least moderately deer resistant.
That was very bold.
Yes, it was. It was like a very bold move. Yeah, I don't
They have
know.
no fear of humans at this point.
No, I
Uh,
know.
and ferns are very, shockingly to me, deer resistant.
Yes, some of them in the spring, as those new, we like the fiddleheads when they come up in the spring. So when those new fiddleheads come up early in the spring, they might browse them. The ones like autumn fern that are still around all winter, they might have a nibble at. And most of the time they are. I mean, if there's severe deer pressure, pretty much anything gets munched on every now and then. And interestingly, I've found that the little babies will try anything. They will try things that are poisonous. All of the things, there's a bunch of poisonous ones that grow in a shade garden, like snowdrops. They contain a poison, so don't eat those, and the deer don't eat those. If you've got like part shade, daffodils will grow fine if you put them like edge of the woods or edge of shade. In the book, I go through different types of shade, like morning sun, afternoon shade, those sort of things, and edge shade. And a lot of gardens have this wonderful edge shade, so it's just outside the canopy. It gets some shade for part of the day, and things like daffodils are fine, and then a lot of your perennials are fine. I didn't even have room in the book to put them all in, but Rudbeckia triloba is great in shade. Agastache funiculum, no deer will eat either of those. Actually, they might nibble the top of the Rudbeckia, but the Agastache, the hummingbird mint, I think it's called, is it? Oh, no, that one, anise hyssop. If you rub the leaves, that's right. Some of the other agastaches are called hummingbird mints, but it's called Agastache funiculum, Foen iculum, and that smells like anise or aniseed, and the deer avoid it. But it actually, I have it growing under a spruce tree, believe it or not. So if a lot of the plants that we grow as perennials actually were much more versatile than we give them credit for.
Yeah, there are several of what you would have considered a sun perennial that seed for me into the shade and up, as you said, right up almost to the trunk of oak trees, and that does include the anise hyssop, which seeds around readily, and I was just blanking on a name. It'll come back to me.
Okay, but a lot of things, that you don't necessarily try, but look for the Rudbeckia triloba. It's the brown-eyed Susan, I think it is, that really has done well in shade for me.
Ah, yeah, I recall the Triceratops, the toad lilies.
Oh yes, 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 they are a great fall bloomer. They can get a little rabbit damage. I've had a little rabbit damage from them. Mind you, I have 100 rabbits, so they've multiplied. But that's a great toad lily is a wonderful one.
Hmm. And what shrubs would you recommend for not necessarily a dry shade situation, but to maybe bring some brightness to a dark shade spot?
Well, all of the hydrangeas, and mine are in full bloom right now. Actually, if you're an Instagram person, check out my Instagram, which is at Northview Garden. So north, like the north-south view garden, and you'll see my hydrangeas. Oh my goodness, I'm so glad they didn't get frosted. They're endless summer, and those are the traditional mop head ones. I have all different hydrangeas. The oak leaf hydrangea is a native. If you like that one, that grows much bigger than I ever realized, but it's wonderful. It's flowering now. You might occasionally get a little deer nibbling on that, but that seems to be less nibbled than maybe some of the others. There are, for like a light shade, is Itea and Clethra. Those are both native shrubs that have fragrant flowers. Itea is you can take wet or dry. So I have a rain garden, and I've got both of those plants down by my rain garden. Let's think what else. Really, all of the rhododendrons and azaleas. I have one rhododendron. If you have a wet spot now, I know we haven't had very much rain, but it's in my bottom area of a garden, and it's blooming now, and it's rhododendron viscosum, and that means sticky, and it has slightly sticky leaves, but it's so fragrant, Kathy. Oh my goodness, you just walk 100 feet away and you can smell it. So all of the rhododendrons, azaleas, mahonias for dry shade, they will take completely dry shade, and there is a native one that's native out west. Witch hazels. I have about 42 different witch hazels, and they bloom in January, February, March. They need some sun, but again, it's just placement with respect to all of your other trees and shrubs and things like that. So there's a few of them, but there's actually more that will take. A lot of our native shrubs will take part shade. because they grow in sort of glades of the canopy. Things like fothergilla, that's another native. That's the one that has the white bottle brush in the spring. That's a great one.
As opposed to the Ohio Buckeye, which has a huge bottle brush,
Yes,
and
yeah.
that's in summer. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I actually, of the small trees, I love. I mean, for shade, I don't know which one is my favorite. In the book, I think I argue with myself about which I like best. But my top three are native dogwood, which I believe we really should all be trying to grow. I know sometimes they get anthracnose and things, but I think it's sort of moving away. And it has the fruit in the for the birds when they migrate south, and most of us on the east are on that eastern flyway, so it's like an energy pack for the birds. So I'm trying to get people to grow that. Red buds, which I love, and that spring color is gorgeous. And then back to the buckeyes, I grow the red buckeye, and it's Aeschylus pavia. And we tried growing the conker-like fruit. We put in, let me think, I think we put in 8 and 9 of, no, 7 of the, not 9, no, put in 8 and the 9, that's like the loaves and fishes. Okay, sorry. We put in 8 and 7 of them are growing, and we're so excited. I love them so much. So it's worth trying. I've tried all kinds of tree seeds from this last year, and they need to be outside over the winter for what they call stratification. But my neighbor has a persimmon, American persimmon tree. So some of the fruit fell over my fence, and so I picked them up, planted those. I've got one of those growing, and I have some little baby dogwoods growing, and I have some pawpaw. I think, do I have any pawpaws? Anyway, but I have all these things growing, and I just am so excited about it. It's really a fun thing. I have no idea what I could grow a forest now. I'm going to have to go to the plant sale or something, but
Yeah, you're gonna have even more shade
I
than even
know.
before.
Yep. And that happens when you have lived in a place for a long time and you like little trees, you'd get more shade. So there you go.
Yeah, I always say that's the progression of the gardener is the first 10 years you're trying to fill in every possible spot with, mostly sun-loving plants, and then you've gotten your shrubs and small trees have grown up to the point that they start shading out some of those sun lovers, and then you're subtracting, subtracting, subtracting for the next 10 years, and and then a tree comes down, and then you're adding, adding, adding for the
I
next 10 years
know.
after that. Yep.
Yeah. Well, this property, because Wilma was a tree lover, um, we still have some old trees that he planted, and so that's really a nice thing because we can enjoy those. But that was a long time ago, so we have been trying to add new and interesting trees to the garden. So.
Hmm. And so, what's on your wish list of either plants that you've had an eye on and wanted to squeeze into your garden, or maybe some plants that are coming up in the trade that are going to be introduced soon?
Ooh, where is my list? I have a whole list, Kathy. I've got all kinds of things. Um, I actually, because I'm writing this new book, I am trying so many things from seed this year. A lot of them are flowers, garden flowers, and we've been growing more perennials from seed, which it's much easier than maybe you think. There are always, because I come from England, there's always I have various English gardening magazines, and then there's always the tantalizing ones that you like. Oh, I wish I could have that. Why can't I have that? Why is that not available here? So I'm still looking for seed of various things. But you actually, if you grow from seed, you can grow a much wider range than you could even buy in the trade. So I'm having a little passion fit about some of the thalictrums, and some of them are very good in either part shade or sun. Some of them. So um, there is one called Thalictrum tuberosum, which I can't even remember what it looks like, but it's on my wish list that I saw. I am a fan of Instagram, I have to say, because you see all these things, you're like, oh, I love that. Oh, I love that. Um, I also am trying all the different foxgloves. because when you're looking at people's borders, and some of them, I've got them in shade, I've got them in sun, the Ferruginea, the grandiflora, we've got some going in the dry garden, never watered, of the lanata, which has a nice little, they all have these sort of tubular flowers going up the spike. Um, and I'm having a bit of a passion fit about spiky flowers, because things like the verbascum um, that I grew this last year, I think it was wedding candles. On the Instagram, I've got a little thing of the pollinators on it. They were going crazy. And of course, I am really concentrating on pollinators because we're all trying to get more of them in the garden. And I'm very worried because we don't have many butterflies at the moment. But
No, this year they seem to be slow in coming.
yeah, so those are some of on my wish list. So
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask for the foxgloves. Are those self-sowing themselves? Are you doing them by seed in a greenhouse and then planting them out? How are you starting them?
okay, I have spent years growing and trying to grow more foxgloves. So this is my trick, especially for the mid-Atlantic, because in England they're native. Though you think of the foxy gentleman in Beatrix Potter, so they're native to woodlands over there, and I grew up with them. That's the Digitalis purpurea, of which there are many different cultivars now. So for years, because they're a biennial, you plant them this time of year. So get the seeds now. I try them all the different ways. So I sprinkle some in place, and I think I actually have most luck with that. And my trick, several tricks, if you have gravel or grit, put the gravel or grit on the surface of the soil. No hardwood mulch. You'll never get it going if you mulch your garden. That's the enemy of all these self-sowers. And maybe another time we can talk about self-sowers, because that's one of my pet subjects. But you sprinkle them on the gravel or grit. You have to get the baby plant to start growing and get its roots down for the rest of this year. And the trick is the gravel and grit or stones. If when they are going, when you can see the baby plants, add more like flat stones around the foxglove babies, because that keeps under the stone is moist, but it sort of sheds the water away from the crown. The crown will rot in our terrible mid-Atlantic freeze thaw, and the baby biennial will get pushed out of the ground and then freeze to death. Horrible death there. But so if you can get it through that winter, then you will have the best digitalis the second year. And purpurea is the easiest ones to start with. That's purples and pinks and whites, and then try some of the other ones after you've got the first one. You have to do that, sow them 2 years in a row, because they're biennials. Then your first crop will come, and the idea is to get it into a self-sustaining little community. So then the next year you do the same thing, and those ones will overwinter, and then the seed from the first lot will hopefully then take over the third year. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I have had zero luck with foxgloves. So I am going to run out today and get some seed packs and start them off.
Yeah, and you can start them. We've got other ones that we started in modules, in potting soil as well. I mean, I'm trying to cover every base with these darn things. And then I'll probably put them out in a cold frame, or, like in a window well or somewhere outside, because I don't think they want to be inside over the winter. I think that won't be good for them. So the trick is how you get them to survive over the winter. And there are foxgloves now that they say will grow from seed in 1 year, but I don't like that. I want them. There's what they call that June gap, or May gap. It's sort of like, when did they bloom? May-ish, and they're probably May for you. But the biennials fill that, so that little bit after the spring bulbs are finished, before the perennials get going. A lot of the biennials fill that gap, and that includes foxgloves and sweet William and all of those sort of ones. So it's just a trick to get them in our winters over that freeze thaw period. So
Hmm. It does sound like it might be a candidate for the winter sowing technique.
yes,
Um, so
yes.
might reserve some seeds to try that as well.
Yeah, I basically, with all of these ones that are a little tricky, I do all the things and I try them. I do succession sowing, because if you planted all of your seed and then we get just like a terrible dry 5 weeks or something, they might not grow. So I always try and do a bit and then try them somewhere else and do a bit. That's how I go approach it.
And I think that's what makes you such a successful plants woman, is that experimentation, that you have to kill almost, I want to say, far more than live.
I know.
Yes.
It's a little
Yep.
soul destroying sometimes. You're like, oh, darn, but it's I do like experimenting, and that's why I put in this dry garden 15 years ago, and I've never watered it. So, that's a whole nother thing, that what can you grow in our mid-Atlantic with no water at all. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Which is wonderful to follow you on Instagram. And again, that address is at Northview Garden, singular. So not
Yes.
gardens, but singular. And how else can our listeners reach you or learn more about the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society?
So the website for the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society is phsonline.org, and I'd love you to look at our Harvest 2020 and see if you can get involved with that. We're definitely all in the whole mid-Atlantic. We've got people in Delaware and I'm sure further south working with us, and we're trying to get 100,000 gardeners to be part of the program and donate food and help our neighbors. So that's our goal. And those of you who know us all know we're doing a lot of tree planting, a lot of community gardens. So all of that information is on our brand new website. So I hope you'll check that out.
Great. And you're always looking for volunteers for those projects as well.
Yes, yeah. Hopefully we'll be able to get back into that soon. As soon as it's safe for people. Our top priority is safety, obviously. And we have a new head of our volunteer program who just started during the epidemic. So she's getting all kinds of ideas for how to engage people. The other thing is online. I just did a webinar last week on how to do a simple garden to vase or vase flower arrangement. So there's all kinds of webinars, plus there are free little like 3-minute growinars, they're called, that we're putting up 2 or 3 a week of those. So there's a ton of information and all kinds of ways to get involved. So come join us on our journey.
Sounds terrific. Jenny, thank you so much for joining our podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me, Kathy. I enjoyed it. It's always fun to talk to you.
Thank you, and I cannot wait to come and visit Northview in person sometime soon.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that day, and I'll be happy to give you a tour.
Plant profile, Clematis. Clematis is a perennial vine that features blooms from large and small in a rainbow of colors. The flower shapes can vary from layered stars to tiny bells. Many have wavy edges or twisting petals. The showy flowers aren't the only cool thing about Clematis. They also have attractive seed heads that last for months and add additional seasons of interest. Clematis make excellent cut flowers, and their seed heads are great to use in dried arrangements. Some clematis are more shrubby than vining, and others have a running habit that make them a good ground cover option. Some of the climbing vines are aggressive spreaders, like the invasive sweet autumn clematis, while most others are slow growing and stay relatively small, making them perfect for a container. There are springtime bloomers, while others bloom late in the summer and into the fall. There are over 200 different species of clematis and hundreds of different cultivars. The purple jackmanii is the best-known clematis of all time. Also popular is the pink and white Nellie Moser and the new taiga with its dramatic green center. There is a native Clematis virginiana, known commonly as Virgin's Bower. that looks very similar to sweet autumn clematis. There is also Clematis viorana with bell-shaped blooms that is native to the southeastern U.S. Clematis are said to be demanding to grow and harder to prune, but their needs are actually fairly simple. Clematis want their roots kept moist and their heads in the sun. One exception to that rule is the pastel flowering clematis, which will fade in strong afternoon sun. Don't worry, you won't kill it by pruning it at the wrong time. If you make a pruning mistake, you may deprive yourself of flowers for a season, but you are still likely to get a few blooms. The early springtime bloomers of Clematis Group 1 bloom on old wood and need only pruning to reduce their size or to remove damaged branches. In Group 2 are the clematis that bloom in early summer. These bloom on both old and new wood. Most of the large flowered hybrids are in this group. Prune them in the spring before new growth begins. Make your cuts just above the healthiest looking buds. Next, cut out any tangles and damaged wood. In Group 3 are clematis that flower from midsummer well into fall. They bloom only on new wood and can be cut hard in the spring to within 6 inches of the ground. Clematis are heavy feeders, and they need to be fertilized regularly during the growing season, but remember to stop when they begin to bloom. Clematis, you can grow that. Logging offline in the garden. A prescription for a nature cleanse in your own backyard. The publishers of Medium.com asked, "What happens when we take a detox from the digital world?" What a cheeky question from a service that depends wholly on online subscriptions. As someone who spends a great deal of my waking hours on the computer, writing and editing my Washington Gardener magazine, doing blog posts, etc., then engaging in social media, I know I probably fall in the addicted category. What form would a detox take, and what does that even mean? Most detoxes start with a cleanse of some kind, a clearing of accumulated toxins. Some programs describe an initial fasting period, and others describe a weaning off. I plan to take a break from social media over this holiday week. I don't think I'll go cold turkey, but we'll just try to stay offline as much as possible to work on some long-neglected projects. To deal with the withdrawal symptoms, I'm lucky to have a garden to retreat into. Although the temperatures are a bit steamy outside, I still can get a lot done. Here are the ways I plan to pursue a nature cleanse. Number 1, go forest bathing. I'll take my shoes off and put my bare feet on the soil in a local park. Number 2, do yoga outdoors. On a sunny day, I will take my mat outside and do my usual morning stretches under the bare arms of a big white oak tree. 3, weed. When getting down on my hands and knees and pulling out the Bermuda grass, roots and all, I often enter a zen-like state. Time passes without noticing, and then there's a satisfying pile of detritus to show for the effort. 4, pick herbs. I will collect herbs for drying and process the ones I've already hung to dry. I will smell their scent and add them to my cooking. 5, plan next year's vegetable garden. I will get out an actual piece of graph paper and a pencil and chart the plot, complete with those seasonal transitions. 6, clean out the tools in the shed. I can bring a bunch of neglected tools inside and sharpen them, oil them, and then I'll clean out the shed so it can be properly stored and not be in such sad shape again. 7, repot some houseplants. The root-bound and those with depleted soil are crying out for attention at this time of year, and I'll finally give it to them. 8, share my bounty. I will bring some extra plants to local gardeners and give some of the harvest from my garden plot to a local food bank. Number 9, turn the compost pile. Somewhere at the bottom of that heap is black gold, and I intend to unearth it and add it to some of my garden beds. Number 10, meditate. I will sit and breathe in the garden. I will take time to simply enjoy it, not photograph it, not journal it, not tweet it, or work in it. After the detox comes a slow reintroduction back to the old routine, ideally refreshed and renewed, ready for a new season in the garden. What's blooming in the garden this week? We just finished celebrating National Pollinator Week, so I was concentrating on what I have blooming right now for the pollinators. In my sidewalk hill strip, milkweed is still going strong, joined by celosia, cleome, monarda, echinacea, and salvias. I've planted 2 new vines, cypress vine and moonflower, that I think hopefully will attract some hummingbirds to my garden. Over at the community garden plot, I have yarrow and borage, which are both covered with bees. What are you adding to your garden to support local pollinators? Let me know at WDC Gardener at Instagram or Twitter. You can find Washington Gardener online at washingtongardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.